Hello and welcome to the HubScale podcast. This week we have Bashyam Anant, Senior Director of Security and AI Product Management at Sumo Logic. Great to have you, Bashyam.
Thank you, Jake. Glad to be here.
Bash, brilliant. Bashyam, I'm super excited to delve into the topics that we've got installed, talk everything AI and cyber. Please kick us off. Tell us a little about yourself, your journey, and where you've got to and how you've got here today.
Sure, thank you. Once again, thank you for having me. So, Jake, I actually started as a strategy consultant for an investment bank. That was my formative experience. And then I entered product management. So, as a strategy consultant, I actually assessed new markets and product concepts in various technology and communications services markets. And my clients were companies like Boeing, Motorola, HP, brand names like that. In many cases, did a lot of market entry assessments and things like this, which resulted in multi-million dollar businesses in some cases. So anyway, that was my formative experience prior to enterprise software product management. But as a product manager, I've been at the intersection of data and AI applied to scenarios like information management, cybersecurity, observability, like at companies like Yahoo, Symantec, and then most recently at Sumo Logic as well. Now, given that early foundation in strategy consulting, I actually practice what I call outside in product management. So what that means is that focusing on the why before the what and the how, essentially understanding buyers and outcomes and success metrics of an innovation before jumping into product definition, if you will. But you can talk about that more, but generally that's been my journey and the way
Nice.
I approach product management.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks for that intro. So I think really to kick us off, obviously currently at Sumo Logic, from obviously what everyone can see, I think in the public eye, there's been a number of exciting, product launches. I suppose, yeah, tell us a little about those. Tell us a little bit about what obviously what you can, but a little bit about what's been going on over the course of the last, few years for you.
For sure. So again, I've been at Sumo Logic for about 5+ years, right? And most of that time, I've definitely been specializing a lot in machine learning, classical machine learning for the first three,
Mm,
4 years. And then more recently, over the last 18 months to 2 years, blending in Gen AI where it makes sense into that mix itself. In terms of product launches, last year was a pretty exciting time for Sumo Logic with respect to machine learning and AI innovations in general. We actually started out the year by launching something called AI-driven alerting, right? So AI-driven alerting is, the main idea there is that if you look at Sumo Logic customers, and I would say a lot of security and observability customers in general, I would say, they are dealing or drowning in alerts, if you will, right? The
yeah.
statistic that I can share from Sumo Logic is that even the smallest customer that uses Sumo Logic is dealing between 50 to 100 alerts per day,
Wow.
right? And obviously at the high end, I've seen stats as high as 2,000 to 3,000 or even 10,000 alerts per day, coming out of the various observability and security uh, telemetry, right,
Yeah.
that customers are dealing with. Right. So AI-driven alerting was basically this idea that, how do I identify the most important relevant signals as a on-call first responder, if you will. A first responder is a generic term we use for someone who's like a developer that's monitoring and troubleshooting and e-commerce application, let's say. Or a first responder could be a security uh, SOC analyst, level
Yeah.
one SOC analyst, who's actually responsible for you know triaging a security finding, if you will. Anyway, so the volume of alerts certainly is a huge problem, and AI-driven alerting, one of the main objectives was making sure that you focus or identify the most important signals that the first responders should care about, right?
Mm,
So think of it as alert relevance is one big aspect of it. And then the flip side of it is also making sure that diminish the noise that are there in these 50 to 100 to 10,000 alerts, if you will,
mm.
that these first responders are dealing with. So again, a two-part problem, increased relevance while also simultaneously reducing false positives and noise, if you will,
Mm,
right? So there was that aspect, and then the second part was actually automation. Again, one of the key themes that I will talk about today is this the flip side of AI is automation. So in the case of AI-driven alerting, the idea there is that it's not merely useful to say, here's an alert, but you want to be able to also tie that alert to a playbook, if you will, and
Yeah.
automate the remediation or diagnosis and remediation steps that fall out from that alert, if you will, right? To the extent that you actually know that. So AI-driven alerting, the second part of AI-driven alerting is to actually trigger automation playbooks in response to an alert. And some of these concepts are not new. So, playbooks are not new.
Yeah.
The core of AI-driven alerting is actually anomaly detection, right? So given a time slice signal, whether it comes from logs telemetry or metrics telemetry, how do you actually identify unusual conditions, which then, form the basis for an alert? Again, very old concept, but the challenge historically has been that it's extremely noisy. Anomaly detection itself is extremely noisy with a lot of false positives and things like that. So a lot of the innovation in AI-driven alerting as it pertains to anomaly detection has to do with, you know, uh, doing things like auto machine learning. Auto ML is an emerging concept. It's been around for like 2, 3 years now, right? Auto machine learning is basically you give the machine a goal or an outcome to target. In our case, maximize relevance, minimize noise. And then the underlying parameters of the learning model are actually self-tuned, if you will, by the machine itself, given the
Right.
goal it's given,
Yeah.
right? So that's a very powerful way of actually getting the machine to learn from its own behavior. And the outcome for the user obviously is that fewer inputs. Like when you set up our AI-driven alerts, unlike some of the incumbent solutions in the market, which literally assume like a data science level user to actually set up an anomaly alert. That's the first thing. The second thing is they also impose the user to select anywhere from 10 to 100 parameters for
Right.
actually set up the anomaly detection itself, right? So with AutoML, what we managed to do is that we solve for the outcomes that I mentioned, but solve for it with the minimum amount of user inputs, if you will. You can literally set up um, an anomaly detection detector with less than 3 inputs, if you will, from the user, right?
Interesting.
Give us the
Yeah.
signal, give us the signal, tell us what your goal is. Do you want fewer alerts and maximize for relevance, or do you want to uh, allow for more alerts with some possibility for false positives? And you
Mm.
just specify that, and then the system pretty much learns from that point on, right? The other big thing in this case, and this is probably more relevant for products in our space, one of the reasons anomaly detection has been somewhat tricky to use in the past is that most products in our space tend to use very little data to train models, right?
Mm.
So in our case, we actually use anywhere from 30 to 60 days worth of telemetry to train our models. And that, for a big part, explains, you know, the output of that is basically more accurate models and then more effective with respect to, the outcomes that you're trying to solve for, right? And there is a range of reasons why products in our space don't do it. Like its cost is a big factor,
Mm.
right? So
Yeah.
obviously,
Can imagine.
that's another theme for today as well, which is, how do you actually deliver outcomes at the lowest possible cost as well as a
Yeah.
provider, right? So again, just to summarize, AI-driven alerting, again, maximizing relevance, minimizing noise with respect to alerts, lots of trickery under the covers with respect to using concepts like auto machine learning, and then last but not least, tying the alert to an automation so that you can go from alert to triage to uh, remediation and resolution all in one flow.
Mm. Yeah.
Okay, so that's one big thing. I would say this is all classical machine learning. The
Yeah.
other big thing that we launched last year was actually our Gen AI solution. So Gen AI solution, it's called Sumo Logic More Copilot, as it happens, but it's actually like an investigation and troubleshooting platform for Sumo Logic customers. Like typically, these are essentially first responders in
Yeah.
security or observability markets. If you will, we can talk some more about that. But again, it's a combination of things that we've done there with respect to, again, getting to answers quickly in
Yeah.
reaction to an alert or troubleshooting.
I think that's the key, isn't it? It's the speed and ensuring that the mundane tasks are I suppose less repeated, and people can obviously, focus on a lot more of the high ticket valued items, and obviously offer their customers a lot better value, really. I think that's the key with it, isn't it? I know probably going to touch on that in, further along the line, but is that sort of the name of the game, you think? And that's the big factor of it all?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned obviously the cost optimization, side of things and cost being a big factor. Is that how, yeah, I suppose talk to me a little bit more about that. Yeah, talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so to me, when you think about AI and Gen AI in particular, right? So what you want to be aware of is that pretty much everybody using some sort of a foundational model,
Mm,
right? Whether you use it as a managed service through things like Amazon Bedrock or you roll your own, the net of it is that uh, you're paying for it quite a bit, right? So in general, with AI initiatives, what you want to be aware of is, finding that balance, like, what's the outcome you're trying to solve for, but make sure that you're doing it profitably. So
mm,
in this space, especially in the cybersecurity and AI space, I don't have any data, but having had the experience for the last 18 months, I would argue the path to profitability, especially for these startups, is probably very challenging. And part of the reason I think is because, just to give you an idea, our co-pilot that I mentioned a little bit before, even though it was a roughly like a year-long journey for us from idea to the first version, I would say the first 3, 4 months of that initiative was pretty much trying to figure out uh, what's the best way to use GenAI, right? And
mm.
and and in our case, it came down to what's that evaluation criteria. So obviously, you need to have solve for the outcome. In this case, accuracy with respect to the specific troubleshooting and
Yeah.
investigation outcomes that we had in mind. But more importantly, the other big thing that we also focused on was can we actually do we know at least from a back of the envelope perspective what kind of costs should we be expecting? So we operate at a petabyte scale, right?
Okay.
And so we need to really figure out at that scale, number one, GenAI solutions aren't designed. I mean, obviously, it'll make somebody very rich if we were to throw all their data into the GenAI, but clearly that's not what we can afford to do. So
Yeah.
we need to figure out what is that set of things that we need to, again, understand the outcome, the use cases, and then optimize in a very targeted fashion. That's the first lever in terms of cost optimization. Understand exactly where you want to use GenAI
Mm,
versus augment GenAI with classical machine learning,
yeah.
right? And that's I think a key principle that we have tried to embrace, if you will. So GenAI, use it in a very targeted way because it's very expensive,
Yeah.
and augment it with classical machine learning, and then also build an experience around the solution itself, right? Where the experience looks magical, but not everything that the user experiences is actually powered by GenAI,
Mm,
right? So
yeah.
that's one part of it. The other part is choice of foundation models. So a lot of the experimentation that I mentioned in the early stage of that initiative was actually around experimenting with foundation models and finding the best fit, right? Uh, Anthropic, uh, even OpenAI, all of these guys, they offer you a range from, the sort of the good, better, best
Yeah.
type. And each of those is trade-offs with respect to performance and costs. And then finding the best fit for your use case is a
Yeah.
big part of that experimentation tax that we incurred pretty early on. Mm.
Nice. Yeah. Going back to the Gen AI Copilot product, how do you see that benefiting companies? How do you see that benefiting security operation centers? What do you sort of see that as yeah, I know because that's
So
the
I
talk
think I
of the
want to,
town at the moment, isn't it? That's what a lot of companies are looking to invest in and how they can cut costs and efficiency and everything like that. But what do you see as it?
yeah. So for me, so at this point, maybe I can quickly share one screen. Can you confirm you can see the screen?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, just to expand on that, right? So obviously there is, what we did in the last one year versus, what the industry can do. looking ahead, right? So what this slide is actually talking about is sort of a framing for how you can actually apply AI and machine learning in cybersecurity. So what this picture is actually showing you, the left-hand side is basically the mostly familiar NIST cybersecurity framework, if you will,
Yeah.
from the asset or attack surface discovery to detections that you run on top of primarily logs telemetry in the case of security, to investigations when you do find a security finding on so suspicious activity, what do you do? Response, right? And then lastly, how do you prevent things, right, in the
Mm.
future? So if you look at what this particular slide is trying to show you, is that one way to think about AI and Gen AI in general is again today our product, the one that I mentioned, as well as lots of what you see in the industry today, is heavily focused on the investigation and response side of security, if you will. Right?
Yeah.
Basically, various monikers like autonomous SOC, AI-driven SOC, all of these terms get thrown about, but fundamentally they're going after the human side of security
Mm.
with respect to how do I think the stats I've seen is for every dollar of security software spend, there's probably $2 to $3 of labor spend in cybersecurity, and
Right.
for good reason. A lot of the AI focus has been on the human side of security with respect to investigation and response. The point of this slide, though, is that if you think about it in this lens, like, if you think about it from the overall discover, monitor, investigate, respond, protect perspective, you might actually find several problems that are actually very much solvable today by using, applying AI in intelligent sorts of ways, right? So, and for example, recognizing uh, personally identifiable information logs. That's an example, right?
Mm.
So things like email addresses, users. This is a hard problem in general to do it at scale, right? But with Gen AI and applying Gen AI cleverly, you probably can come up with a solution, right? So
Yeah.
similarly, attack surface discovery, again, a very hard problem in general, right? And coming up with some sort of an asset catalog or entity catalog, if you will, I think is another problem that you can solve using AI techniques, right? Each of these, I don't want to go through this full list here, but the general
Mhm.
idea here is that there are probably startup ideas, AI economy startups here that are actually focusing on specific niches within this overall flow, even
Mm.
though what you see in the news is basically folks that are primarily focusing on the investigation and response
Yeah.
side of it. So an obvious benefit of Gen AI, I would say, is the potential to accelerate breakthroughs in a lot of these previously unsolved problems. I would say in this framework, if you will, right? Now that being said, for me, when you think about AI, cybersecurity innovation, I think you have to also combine the innovation with experience for it to be useful to users,
Yeah.
right? And what I mean by that is that when you do that, you can actually either solve problems for new users, right? In the case of Sumo Logic Copilot, we actually focused on non-users of Sumo Logic within the same Sumo Logic customer account, if you will. The general idea being that tons of users that are not super familiar writing Sumo Logic queries, right, that are actually not able to self-serve any insights from Sumo Logic, right? So that's what I mean by non-users of a product today that can actually be solved, that can actually be served using Gen AI. But the point is the experience has to be compelling for such non-users to actually use like a fairly technical or sophisticated product. And then the other possibility is also opening up uh, new users by solving new problems for them, right? So, like for example, if you think about driverless cars, you know, obviously it's going after the large market, which is how do I, solve for transporting people around. But if you apply driverless cars and think about, is there an experience that actually solves for consumption patterns that were not possible before? So, for example, driving senior citizens who don't have a driver's license anymore, right? Can a driverless car be applied for those kinds of markets that are generally underserved, right?
Mm.
Right? Or driving a kid or a pet to veterinary doctors visit and things like that. That's what I mean, right? So when you combine the Gen AI with an experience and then start serving solving for problems that are, historically unsolved, if you will. I
Wow.
think, that's a much bigger opportunity here, right? That you want to be cognizant of, right? And then lastly, I would say, besides experience, I think automation is the flip side of AI as well, right? So AI is basically an enabler for automation. That's fundamentally what's going on,
Yeah.
in a lot of these things. Um, so a lot of the autonomous SOC investments that you're seeing here are basically ultimately shooting for an AI that is reasoning about threats and suspicious activity like a level one stock analyst, right? So while some of the claims that we can actually uh, have an AI that behaves like a human, I think that's a little bit far-fetched, I would say.
Mm.
So the augmenting teams is probably not a near-term goal for AI, but I would generally say that uh, being a force multiplier on teams is a very practical way to think about Gen AI and machine learning
Yeah.
in general and security. Even if it's not adding a level one SOC analyst, you can actually make the level one, level two, level three SOC analysts way more productive. Right?
Yeah.
That's a better and more near-term way of, framing how we think about innovation inside it.
Is
Right.
that what,
So
yeah, is that what you sort of see as the long, I suppose the short to medium term, that it just adds more value to the people rather than maybe taking, maybe taking them away from the roles and whatnot. Is that what you see?
yeah, so some people use the term. Uh, uh, in fact, I probably have a slide here. Let's see if I can get that. Right. So if you, this is a very high level framing. So the x-axis is basically sort of your responder skill level, right? Beginner versus expert practitioner. So like in the case of security, the beginners are basically your inexperienced level one SOC analysts, right? Versus a practitioner who's like, hardcore
Mm,
security, L2, L3 type practitioner, detection engineers, security engineers, and folks of that kind, right? So today's log exploration, no matter what name you put on it, the state of the art is basically SIM solutions, log analysis products, and things like this, like Sumo Logic. That's
yeah.
where most of the industry is today, very heavily practitioner oriented, right? The y-axis is basically talking about the alert volume, right? So this sort of heavy practitioner orientation with a log exploration focus can reasonably deal with, say, a low alert volume, if you will, right? So then practically, how do you apply AI or look for opportunities for AI, right? So one is to sort of democratize, that's the x-axis, right? Democratize by going from one to two, like the Sumo Logic Copilot is basically taking a like an investigation or troubleshooting workflow and allowing for even inexperienced or beginner level users
Mm,
to perform at the level of experts, right? So that's the dimension this way. The
yeah.
other dimension is sort of the y-axis, which is AI assisted, right? That's where AI assisted threat detection and response, which is AI doesn't replace the human, but they make the humans more productive,
Mm,
right? So, for example, doing a lot of the containment style actions that are pretty obvious, you can do that. Assembling evidence for the human to review, right? So, if I see suspicious login activity, there is a set of things that humans typically, a level one practitioner would typically do, right? Assemble the context around users and IP addresses, look for network traffic, look for other activities coming out of those users in the logs and so on. So, right, as a human, I can explain it to a beginner
mm,
on what to do, and the AI could uh, assemble all those facts for you so that the practitioner can actually decide what to do with those facts, right? Again, in the very high alert volume, where you have 5,000, 10,000 alerts going on per day, that's probably what I would do initially, right? And then the full AI driven autonomous TDR, that's sort of the autopilot, right?
mm,
From Copilot, you might go to autopilot, if you will. And that autopilot type use case, I think definitely is much further out where actually the AI not just assembles the evidence related to a security finding, but also reasons about it. And then, makes a determination, yeah, this is a false positive, or this is a true positive that needs to get escalated and things like this, right? So that type of stuff, I mean, I just find it hard to believe. I see vendors making such claims. I just feel like, that autopilot style use case where you're literally getting the value of a human through an
Mm.
AI. I just find that at this time far-fetched, knowing what I know about logs data, knowing about the diversity of tools we're dealing with,
Yeah.
and things like this, right?
So you don't see that, yeah, you don't see that happening anytime soon, basically, which is
I
good.
think, like I said, a more realistic would be AI assisted
Yeah.
versus AI driven, right? That's where I see. And then, more practically things like what we've done with our Copilot, which is, expand on the x-axis, which is, democratize,
Mm.
investigations to non-experts as well, right? So
What
those are all practical ways to approach it. Yeah.
yeah. Do you see any risk of, a lack of I suppose skills not being utilized as much throughout, and a heavy reliance on AI, maybe not even just within the security ops space, but even just in general, across tech, do you sort of see that coming into play potentially, and a very heavily reliant on automation and AI?
I do. It's funnily enough, there is several aspects to that, right? But the one that you're directly hinting at uh, is this, notion of automation complacency. This is a term, by the way, that actually comes from the airline industry. So, when you don't know what's going on, you probably look for things that are similar in the past.
Mm.
And it turns out, like in the airline industry, the actually the term autopilot actually comes from there, right?
Yeah.
So the autopilot is basically something that I think got introduced maybe 20 years ago and has pretty heavily used, I would think, for various stages during a flight. As far as I understand, like I think other than landings and takeoffs, most likely the autopilots are pretty much flying the planes. But if you look at the data around AI in that airline context, um, what actually changed? It changed the role of the pilot, right? And it changed the failure modes for
Right.
the airlines, right? That's essentially what the research shows over
Yeah.
the last 2 decades or something. And so again, so the the failure modes for it specifically, if you just spoke, I mean, the role of pilot, obviously, in the cruise phase of the flight, they're probably just monitoring, not
Mm.
doing much.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think most airlines landing and takeoff is still in the pilot's hands, if you will.
Hope
Um,
so.
but if you put that aside, yes, thank you. Yeah, but if you put that aside, the failure mode is really what I want to talk about, which is really, what happens in the airline industry. Again, overall safety profile has gone up, but then, the errors in the industry are no longer, about the flight control issues. It's not about not knowing how to fly the plane, which I think used to be the case, 30, 40 years ago. The failure modes, one aspect uh, is basically AI or automation complacency,
Mm.
right? That's basically what you hinted at, right? So the idea here is that uh, you expecting the AI to work perfectly all the time, and you take the eye off the ball, if you will. So basically, the cautionary trail in that basically is that as a cybersecurity professional, you need to minimally know how to interpret and work with the AI that's being used in cybersecurity. Fix the mistakes, like if being able to form like hypotheses on your own, augment the AI where it's not thinking through fully, fixing the mistakes in the AI when it does happen with respect to hallucinations and things like that, and not to be complacent. That's one big aspect of it. The other failure mode, which is also interesting in the airline industry, is so what I just talked about is the AI getting things wrong, right? So that's the automation complacency itself. The other part is basically, the human AI interface, right? So uh, when the AI does fail, right, the pilots oftentimes don't know how to fly the plane,
Mm.
right? So this, in many airline incidents, this has been true,
Right.
right? So
Interesting.
similar things can happen in cybersecurity. So again, complacency is sort of the normal course of business, and then when you do have an incident, Uh, if you get to a point where you don't even know how to do an investigation without the help of AI,
Yeah.
right? So that's what this is hinting at, right? And that's something to be also cautious about when you think about, AI and cybersecurity.
Yeah. Real. Yeah. Yeah. What obviously there's lots of pros, there's a lot of cons. I know we've sort of gone back and forth and touched on quite a fair bit, but what's your general I suppose general view about AI and where it can go, and it's quite a big open-ended question, I'll be honest with you. But yeah, what's your take on it? What's your view on it? You've worked in the space for a long time, different areas within cyber, but yeah, tell me a bit more what you think about it all and where it can go, maybe.
Yeah, so practically, think about this, right? Think about this NIST cyber framework, and if you think about, the future of AI and security, I think you have to sort of think about these various workflow steps, if you will, and then find where it makes sense.
Mm,
Apply, find the innovation that there's some ideas on this slide, that you can actually build a startup around, right? So something to keep in mind there. And another thing, if you think about, in the 1960s, we put a man on the moon, right? It actually took a decade, from 1961 to I think 1969. But along the way, even though you put a man on the moon, lots of other innovations actually happened, right? So this, the Apollo mission, if you will, uh, there's a lot of enabling tech on the way to
mm,
the putting a person on the moon. There were things like they created new markets for launch vehicles, for example. Right? That's
right.
what SpaceX is doing today.
Yeah.
Right? Satellite communications was invented in a big way. Doing navigation in space. Positioning systems. All of these things, got invented along the way. Although the Big Bang at the end of it was actually putting a person on the moon, right? So in our case, what you should like even in for Sumo Logic Copilot, for example, although we ended up inventing this platform for investigations and data exploration, we ended up having to solve for certain problems along the way. So, for example, we ended up creating a data catalog which basically says of all the telemetry that you're sending into Sumo Logic, what's in this telemetry, so that the AI can then ask and reason about questions and answers in that
Mm,
content, if you will. The point I'm trying to make is that we ended up inventing an asset catalog for structured and unstructured data, which itself is a market by itself,
right.
right? So, but the point I'm trying to make, just like putting a man on the moon required you to innovate along the way, there are lots of, you might set yourself up for a big goal like, autonomous thought
Mm,
or, humans, AI performing at the level of humans. But in getting to that mission, you might actually find that there are lots of problems that you're actually solving along the way, which can themselves be use cases, outcomes, and markets by themselves, right? And that's something that's the potential that you have here,
yeah.
that you want to be thinking about, in addition to the the formal framing that's on this slide, if you will.
Nice. Yeah. Well, what do you see? I suppose this year going into 2025, do you see any big things happening within AI? Anything that we should be looking out for, or any enhancements with what we've already seen over the last, 12, 18, 24 months?
Yeah, for sure, I would say progress,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we assume number four, the fully AI-driven autonomous cybersecurity, response system.
Mm,
That is, we think that's already here, but realistically, what I see for the next 6 to 12 months is sort of the baby steps, which are these, the arrows 2 and 3 in this slide, which is for sure, more and more democratization from a skill sets perspective
yeah.
in cybersecurity. So again, how exactly vendors do it, you can take the ideas from this previous slide and do that. And you can do what Sumo Logic has done, those kinds of things are absolutely valid. But the other dimension being that, dealing with the complexity in cybersecurity with respect to alert volume, tools diversity, and so on. There again, I see definitely a lot of potential for AI assisted, AI as a assistive technology for the
Yeah.
humans in the loop, right? So definitely see a lot of potential there as well. So realistic, that's where I see where we land maybe in the next 12 months. These are some of the kinds of things that I see us working on personally as well.
I think it's very clear to see that AI is here to stay. That is for sure. And obviously great stuff what you've been doing over the last 12, 18, 24, yeah, however long, it's been a long time, but the recent launches for sure, especially in this sort of security ops space, which everybody's looking to invest in. So I think the key though is that it needs the humans, it needs us, it needs the people around it to be utilizing it right. It's nothing without us basically, which is
Indeed.
good.
For the foreseeable future, for sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. Well, look, thanks so much again, Bashyam. It was really, really good to chat to you. And yeah, look forward to everyone else tuning in, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.